Well, over the years, the EU has grown in size with successive waves of accessions, and on May the 1st, there's going to be another enlargement. How would you describe the role or the status of the European Union at present?
It can be best be described as an economic union of Europe on the way to the political union. It began soon after World War II as a device to control production and flow of steel and coal, essential materials for conducting wars between historical rivals, Germany and France, to prevent another tragic war in Europe. But the two fathers of the European integration, French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman and the cognac salesman Jean Monnet, had strong incentives to bring war-torn economies into prosperity. That's why they tried to create a common market for agricultural and industrial products before pursuing any other political purposes. In 1970s, however, they began to pursue a political integration in two fronts. One is the adoption of the common and foreign security policy, which led to the drafting on the first EU constitutional treaty, and the other is the enlargement of the Union itself. With the adoption of a single European currency, the euro, EU will become a political entity very similar to the current USA, if only it could enact a constitution and absorb East and Central European as well as Mediterranean countries.
Well, there's a lot of debate going on at the moment concerning the constitutional treaty, and Britain is going to hold a referendum on that, and other EU members are expected to follow suit. But before going into that in detail, what about the enlargement that's going to take place on May the 1st? What's the significance for this for Europe as a whole?
It means a lot. This is the fifth enlargement since the European Coal and Steel Community was founded in 1953. It has some distinctive features. One is that as many as 10 countries will join the club at once. It is by far the biggest enlargement, and so may cause administrative confusions in Brussels or capitals of participating countries.
Yes.
The other problem is that most of the new entrants used to belong to the Soviet bloc, and few inhabitants knew market economies until they were set free from the communist yoke in early 1990s. After more than 10 years since the collapse of communism, they are still struggling to absorb democracy and market economies. They could join the EU only because EU members had recognized their economic and political progress. Besides, their standard of living are generally very low. Their per capita income are said to be 1/3 to half the EU level. How can they cope with bigger and generally more efficient EU enterprises?
Well, that certainly is a big question, but despite such discrepancies, the applicants have been really determined to join the EU. What do they expect to gain from membership?
They will get both political and economic benefits by joining. But by far the biggest one will be political. Most of newcomers from East and Central Europe were under Soviet shackles for nearly half a century. Even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Baltic and other Europeans strongly felt the menace of the Russian occupation. That's why they desperately tried to join NATO and EU. The biggest benefit they got by signing the accession treaties was the sense of security in a broad sense.
I thought it was rather interesting what the German foreign minister said the other day about, for the first time in modern history, Germany will become the center of Europe without having to invade other countries or be threatened by other countries. Now, you mentioned the gap in income between the new members and the existing members. What are some of the economic benefits that the new members will gain from the enlargement?
They were great too, certainly. After the collapse of the Berlin Walls, East Europeans must have enjoyed at least the convenience of free markets, although they may not yet fully enjoy material fulfillment. The Western, not only European, but American and Asian enterprises may help those people. They only have to open shops and factories there to take the benefit of cheap labor and other production costs.
Well, the new EU will stretch more than 3,000 kilometers east to west and span 3 time zones, and there's going to be a dramatic array of climates. It's going to be a really diverse union, and this alone is bound to cause some sort of confusion. Do you foresee any problems in the enlargement?
There are many drawbacks, politically and economically. Given a glance at the EU Constitutional Treaty, we find that the EU will develop not into a federation like the US, but only to an ever closer union of member states. The Constitutional Treaty is going to strengthen the role of the European Council, made up of presidents and prime ministers of member states. Currently, member states assume the post of presidency for only half a year on a rotary basis. It is obviously too short to be practical. So the Constitutional Treaty is creating a permanent presidency of 2.5 years, re-electable only once. This will be a reasonable decision in that it gives a president a certain real power to lead the EU. But assuming the member states to grow to 25 or even 30, there is scarcely any hope for small countries to become a president.
So it's likely that there might be some sort of resentment from their part.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that the new members hope to gain beneficial economic benefits from the enlargement, but are there any foreseeable problems? What are the feelings of the existing members?
Yeah. Besides years of economic integration, European economy is still stagnant, and unemployment level is near 10% of labor force. So the current member states fear increase of immigrants from new member states. The Commission is actually trying to limit movements of people from participating countries. But judging from the past experience, this type of immigrants may not pose serious problems. Because of language, cultural, and other barriers, European workers, contrary to the Americans, tend to stay in home countries. More serious will be outsourcing by European enterprises. Just as U.S. companies are exporting even high-tech jobs to India and other low-wage countries, very versed to the English, German enterprises may export jobs to Eastern and Central Europe, where many people speak good German.
Now, according to the 2003 White Paper on Diplomacy, the so-called Diplomatic Blue Book, the EU is Japan's second largest trade partner, and in terms of direct investment, it's the number one target. What are some of the effects of the enlargement on Japan?
Japanese interest in the EU seems to have increased since around 2002, when the euro has developed from virtual to actual money with notes and coins. Japanese companies had already increased the presence in Eastern and Central Europe, even before their entrance into the EU. East Europeans are generally fond of Japanese industry. After EU enlargement, their business practices will be westernized, and their administrative procedures will be simplified. All this will help Japanese enterprises settle in Central and Eastern Europe. But there are problems too. East European countries have set extremely low tariffs to Japanese imports.
Yes.
On entering the EU, they may be forced to raise these tariffs to current EU levels. It will be the same with other corporate taxes, which were reduced to attract Japanese investments. It will also be inevitable that environmental regulations will also be raised to current EU levels.
Will the EU enlargement affect other parts of Asia as well?
Not much, I presume, although Chinese and South Korean enterprises will be as eager as the Japanese to invest in Eastern and Central European countries. They let American and European, as well as Japanese manufacturers, to produce high-tech products locally, and then re-export them to foreign markets. The Asian-Europe meeting, ASEM-type corporations, will increase their importance in the future, but their activities seem to be far less active than ASEAN or APEC corporations of Pacific Rim countries. European countries are especially sensitive to counterfeit products, which are energetically made, especially in China. But nobody can deny dynamism of Asian economies. So there will be no lack of European, American, or Japanese producers who are eager to invest in Asia.
Now, going back to the subject of the constitutional treaty, this was supposed to be signed at the Brussels summit in December last year, but Spain and Poland refused to agree to the new system of voting rights. What's going to become of the constitution?
It is now widely believed that the Irish presidency will at last adopt the constitutional treaty in June this year, and the process of ratification will begin soon afterwards. But it doesn't mean that the ratification is assured. The constitutional treaty must be ratified by all of the 15 member states and 10 candidate countries.
Yes.
The constitution and the EU itself is unpopular in, for instance, Britain and some other countries. And British Prime Minister Tony Blair recently declared that Britain would put the treaty to the plebiscite. That will mean that the final adoption of the Constitution is not ensured at all. But we must remember that the failure of the Constitution does not mean the end of the EU. The European integration is the process accumulating the EU laws. We may find in the future that the EU has established itself on as solid a law basis as current USA, although it may take some time before such an edifice can be visible before everybody's eyes.
Well, it seems there's no stopping the eagerness of other countries in Europe to join the European Union. Thank you very much, sir.